So I'm super excited yet again to talk about another topic that's near and dear to my heart, ocean and surf photography. Matt Catalano has been a commercial photographer for a long time, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about his background in a minute. But on top of that, Matt was really one of our first customers. I mean, I remember literally hand delivering some product to him close to a decade ago, and so he's been very special to Outex for a long time. But Matt is a fantastic commercial photographer. He does a lot more than just surf photography, but we wanted to keep the conversation somewhat focused today. So we're going to sort of focus on ocean and surf photography. But Matt, why don't you start by giving everybody some background on your professional career, and maybe even back to how you started, how you ended up where you are now.
So I kind of got started, I guess, through my father. He was an amateur photographer, but he loved it a lot. And he was the type of guy that would always like break out the 70s family slide collection for the whole family to watch, or around the holidays. So I always had like a film camera around me. I'd always pick it up, take some shots here and there. But it wasn't until I got into high school, a friend of mine got on the live surfing circuit. He wanted to make some videos, so he hit me up about making a website, and one thing led to the next. We started kind of traveling the world and getting into surf photography. We went down to Mexico, went to Hawaii, released a couple videos, and then I think it was in college that I was in a college physics class, and they were explaining how light goes through holes, and that's where I kind of it fully clicked for me. It was just that, I think, getting that taste for traveling to some of these surf destinations and combining it with that click and how photography worked, and showing those different perspectives in the ocean, that really started to drive me into it. I didn't get to work in photography right off the bat. I had a job at IBM doing websites and web design and all that stuff. And but the cool thing with them is I could work from anywhere in the world. What that let me do is, I could be in Australia, I could be in South America, Hawaii, whatever I wanted to do.
It's always nice when you can combine a true love or a true passion into something that you can do professionally, right?
Yep.
So how did you then start? When you started, I know today you shoot using a lot of different gear, and I want to talk about that, the different cameras. You do film, you do stills. How did you start? Did you start with film cameras? Did you start with digital? Did you start, stills? What were you doing in the early days?
Yeah, so I definitely started on film with stills.
Okay.
Thanks to my dad.
And then as you transition, what do you shoot today? What's some of the gear that you use today?
Oh man, I got everything you could think of. I've got a couple of them here. I shoot film, motion pictures, Super 8. We got Sony, got still 35mm film, Nikon, DSLRs, Canon, backup. This is my professional cinema camera, the red Epic. We got the Nikonos 35mm film already set for the water.
Yeah, those are awesome too.
Just picked up this one up recently, the Panasonic for video.
Is that the GS, the mirrorless
yeah,
version?
Yeah, the GH5S. So I got this because it has a full frame sensor. It's only 12 megapixel for stills, but for video that gets you better low light performance. So I was working on this for a job in California recently. It was awesome.
And what kinds of lenses, when we're talking about ocean photography, what kind of lenses about the job, and then which cameras you're going to use? Do you bring a bunch and then you kind of let the situation dictate what you're going to use?
Yes, I mean, the more you can plan in advance, the better, because that'll dictate what you bring. And obviously, you don't want to bring too much gear because then you kind of get into like paralysis of I should use this lens or that lens. So the more you know about a job, the better. The more planning that goes into it, you'll know exactly what lenses to bring, what cameras to bring. So I can't obviously bring all this gear, so I have to pick and choose to the job. So, you know, if I was hired for a surf job and I knew I was the guy in the water and I knew the type of the wave was asking for, let's say, a fisheye lens, then I could probably just bring 2 cameras, like one main camera, backup, and 2 lenses, maybe a fisheye, maybe a 35 millimeter. But you know, sometimes you get these last minute calls and you might be going from one job to the next and you got to bring like 3 or 4 Pelican cases with every camera you own and every lens you own. The first job might use the first half and then the second job might have the second half. So, you know, sometimes you wish you had certain lenses on you that you didn't bring because you think about something creatively or you think about an angle that you get and you're like, oh man, I wish I brought that 600 millimeter, but oh well, I'll just work with what I have. And I think that's the key to everything is making the best of what you have on you. You know, if you only have your iPhone, you know, it's more about capturing the moment or getting a wide shot. If you only have your fisheye lens, then get up close. If you only have your long lens, then, you know, go walk up in the mountains and shoot far away. So,
okay.
But yeah, I mean, going back to the beginning of the question, I mean, focus and planning is key with all that. You'll get better results if you know what you want.
So having a vision and thinking through what you want to accomplish, but then also have the travel friendliness of the pragmatism of the shoot, and then the flexibility to adapt with what you have and make the most of it to tell the story.
Right, flexibility.
Okay.
Sure.
So I thought maybe you can indulge us, and what I would love to do is actually show some of your work and have you maybe talk us through some of the shots, you know, what may have been going through your mind, what equipment you're using, and I'll let you kind of guide. You know, I'm just going through, we can go either through some of the shots on your website, for example, or we can go to your Instagram. And I just wanted you to kind of talk us through the story, the gear, and tell us some stories. So yeah, like this one right here.
Yeah, okay. So that would be Noah Wegrich. He's from California. That's at Pipeline. You know, that was just a classic Pipeline afternoon. It was pretty big and heavy. I could have chosen to swim up close, but you know, I generally get more content out of a longer lens when pipe's that big. You can kind of pick off little sections here and there, and you don't have to risk your life all the time. So I
you
think
say that
probably,
so casually.
Yeah. That would probably be with the 70 to 200 or an 85.
Okay.
I was, you know, on the shoulder. So with sports, you know, that first shot's more action based. So you want to be have a lot of agility and everything's got to be set to react to the moment because you don't know exactly what's going to happen or exactly where it's going to happen. Whereas this next shot that's Mavericks, you know, I didn't have access to get out in the boat or ski that day, so I just woke up at sunrise, walked around on the cliff to a different perspective that I was interested in checking it out.
So let me take a quick break there
Sure.
and dive a little deeper into something that you said that I find interesting. You spent a lot of time in Hawaii, right? So obviously you're in the ocean a lot, you surf, you're comfortable with the water. In ocean and surf photography, the environment around you is changing at all times, right? Everything is moving, everything is changing. And so I was hoping you'd talk a little bit about the dynamic of all that, because not only are you trying to get the shot, but you're dealing with the surfers, right? You're dealing with other photographers. So I was hoping you could just share some insight about, people watching, people wanting to get better or to incorporate some of your knowledge into what they do. What are some of your thoughts on preparing, being in the right place, being out of the way, the respect to other people in the water? What are some of the dynamics that happen there?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as respect goes, and kind of dealing with other people, that kind of there's a couple different rules around that. I mean, I wouldn't call them rules, just kind of guidelines to be respectful. If someone's kind of grew up in that area, that's their home turf, especially in Hawaii. You generally want to kind of let them do their thing and be behind them or to the side, or go find another wave or a different perspective. That's in Tahiti. There's very big swell. Everyone flies in from around the world. There's probably 20 or 30 boats out there. It can be a very dangerous situation just for the boats themselves. So the boat that gets the best perspective is probably one of the best drivers with the most agile boat. So it's a different situation than like pipeline swimming out a pipe, where it's kind of like how much you want to risk your life first, and then kind of like if you're in a pack of photographers that are shooting from the channel, you kind of try to be next to each other instead of in front or behind each other. But it gets tricky sometimes. Respect goes a long way.
It sounds like there's there's not only a camaraderie, but a certain amount of seniority, and that over time you kind of develop that, because you get to know not only the surfers but the other photographers, and the community as a whole has a pecking order, and you evolve and you mature and you graduate and you earn your way into different breaks, different spots, right?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, just being a good person and being respectful definitely goes a long way. It's very important just to kind of like say hello to your comrades, and stay out of their way, let them do their thing for a while. But at the same time, if they've been out there all day, maybe you could ask to maybe get a shot, maybe with a surfer that you're working with. Be like, hey man, I'm working with this guy. Do you mind if I jump in front of you for this wave? Just communicate. People are usually pretty respectful.
And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about settings, right? We talked about, you are unique, I think, in that you have so much knowledge just in terms of photography itself. Like you said, you studied light and photography as a whole. You have everything from film to digital, mirrorless, DSLR, etc. And you shoot on all of them. You have different lenses. So I wanted to talk a little bit about shooting itself, right? So you've said you prepare, and then you end up with maybe a couple of different cameras that you're going to use. What settings do you normally shoot? Do you shoot on manual? Do you have certain presets that you kind of start from? Do you adjust everything? And again, maybe we can use a couple of shots. And I wanted you to talk us through what's going through your mind, what the thought process is.
Right. So, in the studio, you're generally always shooting manual. You have light that doesn't change. You know what you want. So that's, you kind of dial in some settings, and that's what you're working with until you change the lighting. Outdoors, surf photography, or most types of outdoor photography, especially with sports, you generally want to prioritize one setting over another. So for surfing specifically, most of the time you want to freeze motion. So that's around 1/1000th of a millisecond, up to about 2000 is where you're freezing water. Back in the 80s, some of those old film cameras, they didn't really shoot that fast. You could only really get up to 320, 500 for a shutter speed. So you gotta think about the limitations of the camera first. And then you got to know what you want to prioritize. Do I want to freeze motion? Do I want to show the motion? And am I using an old camera? If I'm using an older camera without a light meter, then you have to use manual. So then you have to use the Sunny 16 rule, or you have to take a light meter reading beforehand, and then if a cloud comes, or if the sun comes back out, then you got to know how many stops to go up or down to adjust for that. But we're kind of lucky these days with these with these modern cameras because they have computers inside. So if I set it to what's called shutter priority, which is usually denoted by a TV on the, I don't know if you can see the T. There we go. Yeah. TV. So that'd be shutter priority. Yeah. I'll just set that, and then the camera kind of does the rest of the work for me.
Right.
But you still have to have that creative vision. Like, what do you want? I want to freeze motion. You know, and then you also got to think about backlighting, because sometimes the sun or the light will trick the camera, it'll trick the computers. It's not human, so it might think it's too bright. So then you have to compensate for that. So you know, even a computer has limitations. And then, you know, if you want a slow motion, or let's say you want to, you know, you were shooting surfing, and then all of a sudden you see this turtle swim by, and you want to like really capture the turtle and blur out the background, then you have to play with something called aperture, and that you can put the camera on aperture priority. And especially in the water, with like when you're using a water housing, it's not as easy to change all the buttons and hit them easy. So if you just have to change it to aperture priority and your exposure is set in the middle, then generally you can get a shot much quicker relying on the computer and the camera.
That all makes sense. And so to dive even, not deeper, but to talk a little bit more about that station that you are, and then you have the equipment. So you've kind of narrowed it down based on those three variables, kind of what you want to do. Then you've got the athletes that you're trying to capture, or the environment, like you said, in the case of a turtle. So then you've got that fourth variable. Then what? Do you have a shot in mind, or do you have, based on all of those things in your head already, what you're trying to achieve, and you kind of wait for that moment to come and you try to position yourself in the place where you can capture it? Or are you more trying to paint, to use an analogy that you've used before as a photographer? You've got many different paint brushes, and you're using different stroke techniques. So in other words, are you sometimes waiting for that moment that you envision to happen, or are you trying to portray the environment that you in the best manner possible, or is it both?
I'd have to say it's definitely both. You know, you put yourself in the position that you think will give you the results that you envisioned. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you really don't know exactly what's going to happen with the ocean. So it's a little bit of both. You're putting yourself in the best position you can that you think is going to represent the perspective that you envision, and you're using the settings on your camera to react to what, you know, anticipate what's going to happen.
Okay, so it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted to talk a bit about the difference between filming and stills, right? Because you do both, and you do commercial projects where you're combining both. And again, I was just hoping you'd enlighten us a bit about the frame of mind of thinking of the differences between the two. Of video versus still.
Yeah, they're definitely, you know, two very different yet very similar things. You know, photography, you can tell a great story with one frame, and with video, you kind of, you know, you have to string a lot of frames together. So I'd say video is a little bit more challenging because you have to, you know, really think through a storyline. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes down to the post-production, the editing, and the curation of it. Whereas a photo, you know, it's generally about the moment that you're capturing. You know, obviously more goes into a composition and moment and artistic interpretation of the camera settings and stuff. But I'd say with video, you are also composing shots similar to photography, but you have to maintain continuity. You have to make sure that the subject is, maintaining that story and that emotion and that feeling, and it can't just be for a fleeting second. It has to be supported throughout the entire process. So there's definitely a lot more moving parts to video, but not to say that photo isn't just as powerful, because it can be.
Got it. Okay, changing gears a little bit, and by the way, we've got some people online, so you guys feel free to send in questions, and then when we wrap up, we'll address any questions that may have come in. Matt, I wanted to ask you about women surfing. Women have been surfing almost as long as men have, and again, this is not a loaded question. I'm just curious myself. It seems like women surfing continues to grow, and it's getting more of a space. From your better educated perspective, what is women surfing like these days? Is it growing faster than men's? Is it catching up? Where is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Women have been surfing for a long time, obviously, but they have never really been given the notoriety or the equality that the guys have gotten. This goes into a bigger debate about sports in general, and the NBA versus the WNBA, and women wanting to be paid fairly. And everyone obviously believes in equality, but sometimes the economics just aren't there. It's sometimes just bigger crowds for men's games versus women's games, which draws more revenue, and then therefore they get paid more. But yeah, I think the women have really made a big statement, women in general around the world, about everything. And then, in surfing as well, over the last, 10, 15 years, they've really stood up for themselves and really said, hey, like, we're here too. We can surf big waves. We can surf pipeline. We can, do airs and all that stuff. And they can. And there are some really talented women out there, and, some very courageous women, and they're making it happen. But there's also not denying that statistically guys are doing more amazing aerial maneuvers and surfing bigger, heavier barrels, and it is generally more critical and interesting to watch, and that will attract more revenue. So
right, makes sense. Okay.
So yeah, I'm really proud of the level of surfing that I've seen out of women. And not only women surfers, but women surf photographers. When I first started going to pipe, 20 years, and then I'd say about 2012, 2013, I started seeing a lot of women showing up in the lineup, starting to shoot pipe and really having fun with it.
Yeah, no, for sure. We have, within the Outex family, we have some women surfers. Sarah Lee, for example, did a feature recently that got the cover, I think, of ESPN.
Awesome.
For a body issue. So it's great to see. But again, I was just curious, because, as a surf enthusiast, if you will, I was just curious about how it's going. The other question that I had to you about surfing in general is that, as with all sports, the sport has evolved, right? It has gotten more aerial, bigger, faster, bigger waves, toe in and all that. So the sport continues to evolve. Has photography and cinematography changed as a result?
As a result of what's going on right now?
With surfing, right? Because surf, I think, used to be slower, right? Aerials are bigger now. People are going faster than ever. They're surfing bigger waves than ever. So I was wondering, from your perspective, how has the capturing of the evolution of the sport had to adapt as a result of that evolution?
I guess that's a good question. I think it's just easier to capture more these days. It's easier to get content, and it's easier to distribute it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, we're seeing a lot more content. There's always something to consume. There's a big swell pike yesterday. I'm already seeing the content from there. Whereas, years ago, you just had to wait 3 months for the mag to come out.
Right.
So I don't know. It used to be more appreciative when media came out, but now I think having so much more access to it kind of raises the bar. So you're going to see a lot more creativity and a lot more perspective, a lot more innovation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last question, as it relates to that, what about surf pools? Different companies and different surfers like Kelly Slater and others have been developing surf pools, which in essence eliminate a lot of those variables that exist in nature and get it down to, the essential elements, if you will. What impact do you think that is having? What impact do you think that may have in the future for surfing as a sport? And then I'll follow up with what you think about what that does on the photography side. But let's talk about the sport first, where you think, that role comes in and where it may go.
Yeah. Wave pools have been all the rage lately. And I think there's like hundreds of development projects around the world happening right now. So it's going to turn into the modern day surf skate park, where a lot more people will have access to it. A lot of people in the middle of the country that would never have thought about it before will probably get into it. It is a whole different animal than surfing in the ocean. That's not to say that they can't create wave pools that are more similar to the ocean down the line, but it is not the same. But you can, I'd say if someone, grew up in Kansas with an amazing wave pool right there, they could get the skills to go surf regular waves pretty quickly.
Right.
They would just have to kind of adapt to that more wild and chaotic environment.
Okay. And then would you say that for a photographer or a cinematographer capturing, surfing in a wave pool versus the ocean, are there fundamental differences? Do you think that there are drastically different styles that may make someone more successful on one versus the other?
With the wave pool, you can, most of the wave pools that I've been to, you know exactly where the wave's going to break, exactly how it's going to break. So that gives you the advantage to, premeditate what you want to capture with who's on that wave and what they're going to do and where it's going to happen. So you could go line up a tree or whatever you want with your shot, well ahead of time. And to extend on that, you could even place lights at night. I'm seeing people do amazing things with huge lights at night with cinematography. And, it's really your ocean studio
Right.
to do whatever you want.
Right. So in a way, the wave pool is a bit like a studio environment, right, where everything can be more planned out.
Right.
And in the ocean, you're really managing many, many more dimensions. It's a fluid environment, so it's probably much easier to start with a pool environment and not and then have to graduate to ocean. And going the other way around would be easier.
Right, but then you also have to consider the authenticity of what you're shooting.
Right.
Okay, you capture
And
this.
And the unpredictability, right? You can't replicate the environment, with big waves and with certain conditions in a wave pool.
Right. Plus, it takes away just from the original point of surfing was to go out and have that lifestyle and enjoy yourself and have that like element of surprise and having to be intuitive about what's going to happen next instead of everything being planned for you.
Okay. All right. So we're getting a few questions. Matt's already covered a lot of the camera and the gear that he uses, so you can watch this back and get the answer to all that. And Matt is unique in that he uses multiple cameras, both in technology, film, DSLR, mirrorless, and also multiple brands, so you'll be able to see that. The other question that I got was, you've been lucky, you've lived in places like Hawaii, you spent a lot of time there, you spent time in New York City and New Jersey on the shore. You've traveled quite a bit, both personally and professionally. What's the ultimate trip what's the ultimate surf destination trip that if I'm a surf photographer and I want to dramatically build my portfolio when hopefully this whole Corona thing subsides and the world comes back to some sense of normal, where do I make plans to travel to?
I think that's or what's something you've always wanted to explore that you're interested in or curious about, and I think that's the main driver behind photography is capturing things that you find is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, for example, I've never been to parts of the South Pacific. I've never been to Micronesia. I've never been to Morocco. So trips like that are on my radar for the right swell, the right crew, the right people to be with. Every now and then I'll kind of do a trip by myself, but generally it's more fun to kind of be with a group and get that storytelling dynamic.
Okay.
I'm recently became part of Ocean Culture Life. A guy named Matt Paul Catalano that I met in Hawaii, he kind of invited me. It's a collective of photographers and filmmakers, and they're trying to help raise awareness about the ocean, and they travel different places around the world and make films and stuff like that. So it'd be cool to get involved with that, do a trip with those guys.
Okay. A question came in about dealing with the water, right? So we're Outex, so that's a good question. So the question I think specifically was, have you dropped a camera like a Red in the water? How do you deal with the elements, and what's some of your attitude about underwater gear and housings and all that? And be honest, that's part of why we wanted to have you. This is not about Outex, it's about your work.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I have lost a lot of these in the water, these DSLRs, but I've never gotten the Red wet yet. Thankfully, I've had drops of water inside. It has been detached from my body, like the release has been ripped off. Sometimes I've even chucked it because it's such a heavy box that if the wave is big enough, I don't want it to be anywhere near me. So if I don't think I can hold on to it, I try to get away from it. And I've had to, go looking for it a couple times, and I've always found it. But it is scary when you think about how much it's worth. But that's why I bought insurance.
Yeah, smart. I feel like I have to insert a couple of things. So I alluded to the fact earlier that Matt was one of our very early customers, nearly a decade ago. We started with non-transparent housings. They were black in the very early days. This is even pre-Matt. He purchased our gear when our covers were blue. And one of the things that drew me to Matt early on is that he was a customer, like every single one of our ambassadors, who started asking very smart questions, had very positive feedback, constructive criticism. And so we try to incorporate a lot of that dynamic and a lot of the feedback and trying to tailor our development towards it. And the thing that really stood out is that, again, because Matt has such deep understanding of the composition of light, the composition of photography, what photography is all about, the capturing and the painting of light and storytelling with the gear. And because he uses so many different cameras in such dramatically different environments and travels all the time, we had a lot of great dialogue in the early days. We met in person. And to this day, whenever we have a chance and we're in the same city at the same time, whether it's a trade event or a shoot that he's in LA, which he does often, or in New York City, we're often collaborating. So again, I just wanted to say thanks again, Matt, for all of that. We are working, because the question about Red cameras comes up to us all the time. It's not so much about being in the water all the time, but even being on a boat or using it for a commercial shoot, and just wanting the peace of mind of having it protected. Is that about right, Matt?
Yeah, it's peace of mind is a huge part of it. Like you're going on a boat for the day, you're probably not going to get wet, but it might rain. That's a big situation. And then also, you know, back of a jet ski, even like kind of running along the shoreline, you don't want to get salt ingested into the air intake. So,
Okay. Last question, because I think we're running out of time. What's next for you? I know, again, we're kind of on a standstill, but what projects are you working on? What's next? What are you excited about?
so the last year, I actually took a break from a lot of surf photography. I spent a year in New York City doing fashion, a lot of lifestyle fashion, a lot of office time. So I'm now, I don't know whether it's thanks to the pandemic or how I should phrase this, but I'm actually excited to hopefully get back out into the field. Yeah, so that's some of the lifestyle stuff I've been working on. But you know, I miss the adventure. I miss the chase. I miss just shooting water in general. It's such a dynamic subject, and you know, I can't wait to, you know, put some things together, some trips together, some projects together, concepts. You know, maybe start a new business that kind of revolves around the ocean and trying to raise awareness around it. You know, we might, you know, eventually this pandemic will be over, and we're going to have to look to the, you know, our next challenges, which are obviously sustainability. The ocean plays a huge part in that. How we can all do our part, either whether it's plastic or whether it's, you know, just keeping the beach clean, or just all the chemical runoff into the ocean. Whatever we can do our part. I'd love to raise awareness about that.
Fantastic.
And sometimes that's about capturing what the ocean is, how beautiful it is now, to entice people to try to preserve it.
Sounds good. We will sure be following, and we will keep people posted. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us and teach us something.
Of course.
Sincerely appreciate it. You know, we'll continue with our series next week. We've got a lot more exciting topics to discuss, and we'll try to work Matt into our rotation so that he can maybe talk about some other parts of his commercial and professional skill set at some point. But thanks again. Stay productive, stay safe, and we'll be talking soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for joining.
Be good.
See
you later.
Just a reminder that this series is sponsored by Outex, water housings that allow speakers like the ones you're watching to take care of their business in any environment, even underwater, with complete control over their camera and lens, glass ports, and a modular solution. You can follow us, like, and subscribe on all of our social media channels, and learn a lot more at outex.com, where we have links to the community and much more. Enjoy the rest of the show.